Hello, my friends, and welcome back to By Then I Knew. What if the trip to a divorce hearing became the very moment that changed your fate forever? Today, I have a very special story that touches the heart. A story about the quiet power of sincerity. It is the story of a wife looked down on by her husband, only to be defended by someone completely unexpected because of one small act of kindness on a city bus. But before we step into the story, please keep supporting this channel by hitting the like button and subscribing right now. I also want to say hello to all of you first. Check in for me in the comments. Write your name, tell me what city you're watching from, and type the word present. I want to know just how far away the friends of By Then I Knew are watching from. Are you ready to hear it? Grab some tissues and a snack. Let's begin. That morning, the sunlight slipped through the gaps in the kitchen blinds, but it could not warm Emily Wilson's heart. Her eyes were empty, fixed on a brown envelope lying silently on the dining table. The envelope bore the official seal of the Cook County Family Court. Emily's hands shook hard as she slowly reached for it. Her heart pounded, as if it already knew what terrible news was hiding inside. Grant Miller had not come home in 3 weeks. Her husband, the man who had once promised to stand by her through joy and sorrow, when they were both building their lives from nothing, had changed completely. Ever since his career as a young attorney had begun to rise, and his name had started circulating in Chicago's legal circles, Grant had turned cold. He rarely answered her calls. He always claimed he was working late. Then came the worst of it. He left the house without even saying goodbye. Holding her breath, Emily tore open the envelope. Her eyes moved line by line across the white paper. A divorce hearing notice. Scheduled for the next morning, Emily's chest tightened. It felt as if the air in the room had suddenly grown thin. Tears fell from her eyes and soaked the paper that now stood as proof of the collapse of her marriage. Before the tears on her cheeks had even dried, Emily's phone buzzed. A new message came in. Grant's name appeared on the screen. Once, that name had made her smile every time she saw it. Now it brought only a sharp pain beneath her ribs. She opened the message with trembling fingers. "The papers arrived, right? Don't forget to show up tomorrow. I expect you to cooperate, Emily. Don't make a scene and don't make this harder than it has to be." The message was so cold. No greeting, no softness, no trace of the man she had loved. It was as if Emily were a stranger he had only just met. Emily took a long breath, gathering what little courage she had left before replying. "Grant, why does it have to be like this? Can't we sit down and talk first? I have the right to know what I did wrong that made you so willing to divorce me so suddenly." Grant's reply came quickly. This time, the message was longer, but every word was like a blade cutting into Emily's heart. "Talk? We don't have anything to talk about anymore. Wake up, Emily. Look at me now, then look at yourself. I'm an attorney at a respected law firm. Every day I meet high-end clients, executives, politicians, and business owners. And you? You're just a regular housewife who only understands the kitchen and the bedroom. You're not on my level anymore. Taking you to office evidence would only embarrass me. You can't keep up with the world I live in now." Emily sank weakly into the dining chair. Her heart shattered as she read her husband's cruel honesty. She remembered the hard years, back when Grant was still in law school, and they had to split one cheap takeout meal because his money had gone to casebooks and tuition fees. Emily was the one who stayed up late, doing alterations for neighbors, so she could help cover his school expenses. Emily was the one who encouraged him when he failed exams, lost confidence, and nearly gave up. "Have you forgotten who stayed beside you from the beginning?" Emily typed through sobs. Her tears were flowing now, impossible to stop. "Who fixed your first suit jacket for your job interview?" "That was me, Grant. Your wife." "Don't bring up the past," Grant replied almost instantly, as if Emily's words were nothing more than an irritating attack. "That was your duty as a wife, and I repaid it by feeding you and giving you a decent place to live all these years, didn't I? So we're even. Listen carefully, Emily. Tomorrow in court, I want you to agree to every part of the divorce without objection. As for marital property, forget it. This house, the car, the savings, everything is in my name. You didn't make a real financial contribution toward buying any of it. So don't even think about asking for a share." Emily stared at the message, stunned by his cunning. The down payment on their small house had come from her own savings, money she had earned through years of sewing and alterations before Grant became successful. But Grant, this house. Before Emily could finish typing, her phone rang. Grant was calling. She answered with shaking hands, afraid but desperate for an explanation. "Hello." Emily's voice came out hoarse and weak. "Listen to me, Emily." Grant's voice was hard, firm, and full of intimidation on the other end. "Don't even try to fight me. I'm an attorney. I know the loopholes. If you dare demand marital assets or complicate this divorce, I'll make sure you don't get a single dollar. I'll lay out all your flaws in front of the judge. I'll humiliate you so badly you won't have a face left in this city." "What flaws, Grant? I've devoted myself to you all this time. I never did anything wrong," Emily sobbed. Her heart ached at the accusation. "I can find something. That's what I'm good at," Grant snapped arrogantly. "I can twist the facts until you look guilty. So if you want a peaceful life after the divorce, do what I tell you. Show up tomorrow, nod in front of the judge, sign the papers, and get out of my life. Take your clothes. The rest is mine." Grant ended the call without waiting for her to answer. Emily set the phone down on the table, her body drained. The dining room felt silent and frightening. She looked around the small house she had cared for with love for the past 5 years. The walls she had painted herself, the curtains she had sewn herself, everything held the mark of her hands. And now Grant wanted to seize all of it, just because he believed Emily was no longer worthy to stand beside him at the peak of his success. Success that had been built with Emily's prayers, sacrifice, and sweat, too. Slowly, her pain turned into a tight pressure in her chest. Emily felt small and powerless. Her opponent was her own husband, an attorney who understood the law and knew how to talk his way through anything. What could a simple woman like her possibly do? She had no money to hire an attorney. She had no powerful connections. She had no one to call. But in the middle of her despair, Emily caught sight of her reflection in the glass cabinet across the room. Her face was swollen. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Do I really have to give up just like that?" she asked herself. Then she remembered something her late mother used to tell her. "Be a strong woman. Guard your dignity." "No," Emily whispered, wiping her tears away roughly. "I may be poor right now. I may not have a fancy degree like Grant, but I have dignity. I won't let him trample me any deeper. Let him take the property if he wants. But I won't let him crush my worth." That night, Emily could not sleep. She spent the hours packing a few clothes into an old tote bag. She would not take any property if that was what Grant wanted. But she would walk into court the next day with her head held high. She would face Grant. She would show him that even if he could divorce her, he could not destroy her soul. The next day would decide everything. Emily closed her worn bag. She had no money for a rideshare to the courthouse because Grant had blocked her access to their joint savings account. The only car they owned had been taken by Grant a week earlier. "I'll take the bus," she murmured softly. "It's all right. I used to walk and take public transportation before Grant became successful." Outside, the night wind blew hard, as if signaling the storm she would have to face in the morning. Emily closed her eyes and prayed silently that God would give her the strength to get through the heavy day ahead. What she did not know was that God had already prepared another plan, a plan neither Emily nor Grant could ever have imagined. A simple meeting the next morning would turn everything around. The morning sun had not climbed too high yet, but its heat already pressed against Emily's skin. This was the day she had dreaded most, but whether she wanted to or not, she had to face it. Emily stood in front of the old mirror in her bedroom, smoothing the simple cream cardigan, whose color had faded from too many washes. It had been a gift from Grant 5 years earlier, after he received his first paycheck as a junior legal assistant. Back then, he had handed it to her with eyes full of love. Now it was only a silent witness to how drastically Emily's life had changed. She chose a modest long dress with a small floral pattern. No jewelry hung from her neck or wrists. She had removed her wedding ring the night before and placed it in her dresser drawer. It felt too heavy to wear the symbol of a sacred bond that was about to be forcibly cut in front of the law. She tried to soften her swollen face with a little powder. Still, the dark circles from crying all night could not be fully hidden. Emily stepped out of the modest one-story house that had been her little palace all these years. She locked the door carefully. Soon she might have to hand that key over to Grant, just as he had threatened the day before. "Take your clothes, the rest is mine." The words echoed again, making pain twist beneath Emily's ribs. As she stepped out through the small front gate, Emily saw several neighbors gathered near a vegetable stand not far from her house. She lowered her head, hoping she could pass by without drawing attention. But that hope was useless. "There's Emily," one woman whispered loudly enough to be heard, "all dressed up this early. Where do you think she's going?" "I heard she's going to divorce court," another neighbor replied in a thick, gossiping tone. "Poor thing. Her husband is a successful lawyer now, isn't he? Always driving a different nice car. And now his wife is walking to court. Maybe Emily did something wrong for him to divorce her like that. Maybe. Rich men usually want someone on their level. Maybe Emily didn't take care of herself, so he went looking for someone prettier." The sharp sentences pierced Emily's ears. She wanted to scream in her own defense. She wanted to tell them that she had sacrificed her youth, her softness, and her strength to support Grant's career until he succeeded. She wanted to tell them she had not neglected herself because she was lazy, but because she saved every dollar of household money, so Grant could buy expensive dress shoes and not feel ashamed in front of clients. But Emily stayed silent. Her tongue froze. She simply quickened her steps, leaving behind the cluster of neighbors who looked at her with pity and judgment. The walk to the bus stop was long, a little over half a mile from her neighborhood. Emily walked along the dusty sidewalk while cars passed beside her. The luxury vehicles reminded her of the car Grant usually drove. In the past, she often sat beside him while he talked proudly about the cases he had won. Now she was only a pedestrian pushed to the side. The heat and the street dust made a cold sweat bead at her temples. But the fear inside Emily's chest troubled her far more than the weather. The image of the formal, cold courtroom haunted her. She pictured Grant sitting there in his expensive suit, surrounded by sharp-tongued lawyer friends, ready to tear apart Emily's dignity with legal arguments she did not understand. "What if I say the wrong thing?" Emily thought anxiously. "What if the judge believes all of Grant's lies? What if I really get thrown out with nothing? Where will I live after that?" Fear was like a monster slowly eating away at her courage. Emily gripped the strap of her tote bag tightly. She felt so small, like an ant about to fight an elephant. Grant had everything: money, position, legal knowledge, and connections. Emily had only honesty and the last scraps of faith that God was not asleep. When she reached the bus stop, Emily sat on a rusted metal bench and waited for the bus to the family courthouse. Around her, people were busy with their own lives. Some stared at their phones, some gazed blankly into the distance, and some slept from exhaustion after a night shift. In the middle of all that noise, Emily felt deeply alone. There was no hand to hold hers and strengthen her, no shoulder to lean on. A glossy black sedan passed slowly in front of the stop. The windows were dark, but Emily recognized the license plate. It was Grant's car. Emily's heart seemed to stop. The car glided smoothly through traffic with arrogant ease, while Emily waited for an old bus that still had not arrived. Their difference in fortune stood plainly before her eyes. Grant traveled in comfort. Emily had to struggle just to reach the place where her fate would be decided. "God," Emily prayed silently, her eyes glassy as she stared at the asphalt. "If this separation really is the best path, strengthen my heart. Don't let me break in front of Grant's arrogance. Give me just one bit of help today, so I don't feel so alone." A short while later, the bus finally appeared from around the corner. Black smoke poured from its exhaust. It was crowded. The driver shouted for passengers to hurry. Emily let out a long breath and forced her legs to stand. She prepared herself for the crush of bodies, for an uncomfortable ride, for a journey as uneasy as the life she was living now. She stepped onto the bus without realizing that her quiet prayer would soon be answered in the most unexpected way inside that packed city bus. The air inside the bus was stuffy. The smell of sweat, cigarette smoke clinging to people's clothes, and road dust blowing in through open windows, all mixed together. Emily stood squeezed between a man carrying a large sack and a group of noisy high school students. Her legs were starting to ache from trying to keep her balance every time the bus sped up or braked suddenly. The driver seemed determined to make up time, pushing the old bus recklessly through traffic, without caring about the comfort of the passengers inside. Emily tried to close her eyes for a moment and calm the storm in her chest, but the blaring horns forced her to stay alert. The priority seats in front were already full. Ironically, they were occupied by young people, busy with their phones, pretending to sleep or wearing earbuds, as if they had closed their eyes and hearts to the world around them. Not one of them cared that a pregnant woman was standing with difficulty nearby, or that an elderly woman was gripping a metal pole with all her strength. The bus slowed again as it approached the downtown market stop. The stubborn hydraulic door opened with a rough screech. Come on, hurry up if you're getting on," the driver barked from the front. From below, an old man tried to climb aboard with great effort. His hair was completely white, his body thin, and he wore a faded button-down shirt and loose dress pants that hung awkwardly on him. His wrinkled hand trembled as he tried to reach the high rail by the bus door. His steps were heavy and slow. "Come on, Grandpa, move a little faster," the driver snapped impatiently. "We don't have all day." He did not even step down to help the old man aboard. The other passengers only glanced over with irritated expressions before returning to their own business. There was no empathy in their faces. To them, this slow old man was only an obstacle on the way to work. At last, the old man managed to set one foot on the bus floor, breathing hard. But before he could find a firm handhold, the impatient driver hit the gas. The bus lurched forward violently. The old man's frail body swayed backward. He lost his balance. "Watch out," a woman near the door cried, but she did not move to help. Emily saw it happen from the middle aisle and reacted instantly. She forgot her own sadness. She forgot her shame. Her humanity took over. Quickly, she pushed through the other passengers and grabbed the old man's arm just before he fell backward toward the still open door. "Careful, sir," Emily cried, holding his weight with all her strength. Her hands, soft but steady, gripped his arm and saved him from what could have been a terrible fall. The old man looked shaken. His face was pale, his breath rushed. He stared at Emily with eyes still carrying the last traces of panic. Thank you, child," he said in a hoarse, trembling voice. Emily gave him a small smile, sincere and calming. "You're welcome, sir. Hold on to me." Then she looked around, searching for an empty seat. There were none. Every seat was taken. Her eyes landed on a young man sitting in a priority seat right in front of them. He had been playing a game on his phone the whole time, completely indifferent to the commotion. "Excuse me," Emily said to him, her voice gentle but firm. "Could you please give this gentleman your seat? He's not strong enough to stand." The young man looked up at Emily and the old man with a lazy expression. He huffed, annoyed, as though Emily had interrupted the most important moment of his life. Reluctantly, with a sour face, he stood without saying a word and moved toward the back of the bus, grumbling under his breath. "Please sit here, sir," Emily said, slowly guiding the old man into the seat. She made sure he was comfortable before letting go. The old man breathed with relief as his frail back touched the seat. He rubbed his trembling knees. Once he had calmed a little, he looked up at Emily, who now stood beside him while holding on to the seat back. "Thank you so much, child. If you hadn't been there, I might have rolled right out of that door," the old man said again. This time, Emily could see his face more clearly. Though wrinkles lined his features, his eyes were sharp yet peaceful. A strange dignity radiated from him, something that did not match his faded clothes. "It's all right, sir," Emily answered politely. "We're supposed to help one another." She adjusted her tote bag and tried to hide her left hand, which no longer wore a wedding ring. "You don't see many young people who care like you do these days," the old man murmured, almost to himself. His eyes moved over Emily from head to toe. He noticed her simple but neat clothes, her lovely face clouded with sorrow, and her swollen eyes. The old man, Samuel Whitaker, was not an ordinary man who happened to be riding the bus. That day, he had deliberately left his luxury car and private driver at home. He had wanted to remember the old days, the years when he fought for justice from the ground up, when he felt the pulse of ordinary people, whose lives he had often defended in his rulings. But he had not expected to nearly get hurt. And he had certainly not expected to be saved by a young woman who looked as though she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The bus shook again as it rolled over a pothole. Samuel saw Emily sway slightly, yet she still tried to stand tall. "Child, where are you headed so nicely dressed? Taking the bus like this?" Samuel asked, opening the conversation. He wanted to know more about this kind-hearted woman. Emily hesitated. She was not used to sharing her troubles with strangers, especially when her destination was not something to be proud of. The family courthouse, shame, brushed over her. How was she supposed to answer? Should she say she was getting divorced? That she had been discarded by her successful husband? I have a little business to take care of, sir," Emily said diplomatically, trying to smile though her lips felt stiff. Samuel nodded slowly, as if he understood that some things were not easy to say. But his old eyes that had spent decades looking at the faces of people in courtrooms, could read body language very well. He saw restlessness, fear, and deep grief in Emily's eyes. "Your face is cloudy, child, like the sky before a storm," Samuel said suddenly, his voice as gentle as a father speaking to his daughter. "A good person like you shouldn't look so sad." That simple sentence somehow struck Emily's heart. The wall she had built around herself since morning began to crack. In the noisy bus, surrounded by people who did not care, the sincere attention of this old stranger made her eyes burn again. Emily turned her face toward the window, fighting to keep her tears from spilling in front of everyone. This unexpected meeting had opened a small crack in her frozen heart. The city bus moved haltingly through morning traffic. Amid the diesel roar, pollution, and sharp honks, the conversation between Emily and Samuel flowed quietly, creating a small pocket of calm in the chaos of the passengers around them. Emily drew a deep breath, trying to push away the tightness returning to her chest because of the old man's question. She looked at Samuel again. His face reminded her of her late father, calm, lined with experience, and filled with a sincerity that was hard to find in a big city. She did not know what pushed her to speak. Maybe she was tired of carrying everything alone. Maybe she felt she would never meet this old man again after today. So there was no harm in sharing a little of the weight. "I'm going to family court, sir," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper so the other passengers would not hear. Her eyes dropped to the tips of her worn shoes. Samuel stayed quiet for a moment. He did not look surprised, but his face became more serious and full of empathy. He shifted slightly in his seat so he could hear her better over the noise of the bus. "Not to handle someone else's paperwork, I imagine," he said carefully, though he already guessed the answer from the sadness surrounding her. Emily shook her head slowly. A bitter smile touched her lips. "No, sir, to end my own marriage. Today is my first hearing." Silence fell between them. Only the voice of a street vendor at the next stop calling out bottled water and tissues broke the awkward quiet. "My husband doesn't want me anymore," Emily continued. This time, her tears refused to cooperate. One drop fell onto the back of the hand she was gripping tightly. "He's successful now. He's important. He says I'm no longer worthy to stand beside him. He says I embarrass his career." Hearing that, Samuel's jaw tightened slightly. His wrinkled hand gripped the head of his wooden cane more firmly. As someone who had spent decades in the legal world, he had seen plenty of cases like this. The old story of someone forgetting the people who helped him rise. Loyalty betrayed by the glitter of money and status. Still, hearing it directly from a woman as kind and gentle as Emily made anger move through his chest. "He's a fool," Samuel said suddenly. His voice was quiet but firm. Emily turned toward him in surprise. She had not expected such a sharp comment from this polite-looking old man. "What do you mean?" Samuel looked directly into Emily's eyes. His gaze was sharp but calming, as though he were passing strength to her. "Child, there are many people in this world whose eyes are broken," he said in a thoughtful tone. "They see a piece of broken glass shining in the sun and mistake it for a beautiful jewel. Then, chasing that broken glass, they throw away the real diamond they've been holding for years. Your husband is one of them. He's blinded by glass, and he doesn't realize he has just thrown away the most precious diamond in his life." Emily froze. The old man's words were beautiful, and they pierced straight into her heart. All this time, Grant had made her feel worthless, like trash that deserved to be thrown away. But this stranger, who had known her for only 10 minutes, called her a diamond. "But I'm not a diamond, sir," Emily whispered, still dominated by the low opinion she had begun to have of herself. "I'm just an ordinary woman. I don't have a high degree. I'm not rich. I'm not as beautiful as the women my husband works with. Beauty and titles fade with time, child." Samuel cut in gently but quickly. "But a sincere heart, a heart brave enough to help an old man on a bus while you yourself are suffering, that is a rare luxury. That is the real diamond. And believe me, one day your husband will cry blood when he realizes what he let go of today." Samuel's words were like cool water poured over the dry desert inside Emily's heart. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, Emily felt seen. She felt valued as a human being, not as an expired object ready to be discarded. "Thank you, sir. You're very kind," Emily said sincerely, wiping the remaining tears from her cheeks. "I pray your children always love you, because you are a very wise man." Samuel smiled mysteriously at that prayer. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. He simply patted Emily's hand where it rested near the seat back. "Save your tears, child. Don't cry for someone who doesn't know how to value you. Lift your head. You did nothing wrong. Let the world see that you are strong." Not long after that, the driver called out loudly, "Courthouse, family courthouse. Anyone getting off, get ready." Emily startled. The brief ride felt as though it had passed too quickly. Her heart began pounding again as she realized she had reached the battlefield. "I have to get off here, sir," Emily said politely. She stood and, out of reflex, offered Samuel her hand again. "Where are you getting off? Let me help you move closer to the seat, so you'll be comfortable if more passengers get on." Instead, Samuel slowly stood as well, using Emily's hand for support. "I'm getting off here too, child." Emily frowned in surprise. "You have business at the courthouse too?" "Yes, a little matter to settle, and while I'm here, I'd like to accompany you," Samuel answered casually as he moved slowly toward the door. "Oh, please don't trouble yourself, sir. You must be tired," Emily said, feeling guilty. "No trouble. I want to make sure you walk in there with your head held high. Consider it my repayment, because you helped me earlier," Samuel said stubbornly, with a touch of humor. The bus stopped in front of the courthouse, a large building that looked grand but felt cold to Emily. She stepped down first, then patiently helped Samuel descend the tall bus steps. The two of them stood on the sidewalk, looking at the gates of the building where Emily's marriage would be decided. The sun was hotter now, but Samuel's presence beside her gave Emily a strange calm. She no longer felt alone against the world. Even if she was accompanied only by an old man she had just met, it felt far better than arriving alone like a defeated person. Emily took a long breath, filling her lungs with new courage. With Samuel beside her, she walked through the courthouse gates, ready to face Grant and all his arrogance. What Emily did not know was that the small steps of the old man beside her would soon cause a tremendous shock inside that building. The family courthouse stood firmly with tall pillars rising into the morning light, as though declaring that this was where sacred promises would be tested and decided by the judge's gavel. Emily walked into the courtyard with her heart pounding wildly. The air around her felt heavy, perhaps from the grief and anger of so many couples who had come there to separate. Beside her, Samuel walked slowly but steadily, his wooden cane tapping the lobby floor in a regular rhythm. Their contrast drew several glances. Emily, young and pale-faced in simple clothes, walked beside an old man whose worn clothing seemed out of place in such an imposing government building. When they reached the reception desk, Emily stopped. She felt uneasy dragging a man she had just met into the humiliating drama of her marriage. To her, Samuel had already done more than enough by accompanying her off the bus. "Sir, thank you so much for walking with me this far," Emily said gently, turning to face him. "If you have other business, please go ahead. I don't want to trouble you by making you wait through my hearing. It may take a long time, and this place doesn't feel very pleasant for someone your age." Samuel gave her a small smile, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes softening kindly. He did not move from where he stood. "Emily, an old man like me has plenty of spare time. The house is quiet, and there's no one to talk to. Besides, it's hot outside, and there's air conditioning in here. Let me sit in the waiting area for a while and rest my legs." Emily looked at him doubtfully. "But, sir, when my husband comes, I'm afraid he might speak harshly. I don't want you to be offended or dragged into his anger." My husband can be temperamental when he doesn't get what he wants." Samuel's face grew a little more serious, though his smile did not disappear entirely. He patted the back of Emily's hand. "That is exactly why I want to be here. I want to see what kind of man would dare throw away a woman as polite and kind as you. Don't worry about me. This old man has tasted enough of life's bitterness. A young man's shouting won't give me a heart attack." Hearing him address her with such respect made Emily's heart stir. There was true regard in his voice, the kind she had not heard from Grant in a long time. At last, Emily nodded. In her heart, she felt relieved. The truth was, she was afraid to face Grant alone. Samuel's presence, even if he only sat quietly as a stranger, gave her a little sense of safety. It felt like being accompanied by a father ready to stand between her and the world. "All right then, sir. Let's sit in the waiting area over there," Emily said. They walked toward the row of chairs lined neatly along the hallway leading to the main courtroom. Several people looked at them with curious eyes. Even a security officer glanced suspiciously at Samuel because his clothes were not very neat. But Samuel walked with his chin lifted, indifferent to people's judgment. He carried a strange confidence, as though the building were his own home. When they sat down, Emily kept twisting the edge of her dress between her fingers. Her eyes moved restlessly around the lobby, searching for Grant. The fear was still there. The image of him arriving in an expensive suit, smelling of sharp cologne, and ready with cutting words, made her stomach ache. "Calm down, child," Samuel whispered beside her. He seemed to hear the thunder of anxiety in Emily's chest. "Take a deep breath. Don't let him see you tremble. If you look weak, he'll feel even more victorious." Emily followed his advice. She drew a long breath, trying to steady her heartbeat. "Have you ever dealt with something like this before?" Emily asked softly, trying to distract herself from her nerves. Samuel looked into the distance, his eyes resting on a painting of the scales of justice on the wall across from them. "I've seen thousands of people cry in buildings like this, child. Some cried because they were sorry, some cried because they were wounded, and some cried with joy because they were finally free from suffering. Divorce is painful, yes, but sometimes it is the doorway to real happiness. Perhaps God is breaking your heart today to save your soul in the future." Those wise words sank back into Emily's heart. She felt that the old man beside her was no ordinary passenger from the bus. His way of speaking was too composed for someone random. But Emily did not dare ask who Samuel really was. For her, it was enough that he had become her helper today. Number A15. "Petitioner and respondent, please prepare." The voice from the speaker echoed through the hallway. Emily flinched. It was not her number, but the sound reminded her that her own hearing was drawing near. She glanced at the wall clock. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Grant should have arrived already. Suddenly, from the main entrance, came the hard sound of polished dress shoes striking the floor. Confident footsteps, arrogant footsteps. Emily knew that sound too well. "That's him," Emily whispered, her face going pale. Samuel turned to follow Emily's gaze. A young man walked in with a handsome but arrogant face, wearing a sleek designer suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. Behind him followed another man carrying a thick leather document bag, likely his colleague and attorney. Grant entered like a ruler. He did not look left or right. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, as if everyone in the room should move aside for him. The aura of arrogance clung heavily to him. Samuel narrowed his eyes, watching Grant approach. His old hand tightened around the head of his cane, not from fear but from restrained anger at the behavior of this young man who acted as if he owned the place. So that is him, Samuel thought. Let's see how high he can fly before his wings break. Emily lowered her head, trying to hide her face, but it was too late. Grant had seen her. A cynical smile formed on his lips when he noticed his wife sitting in the corner of the waiting area. Grant changed direction and walked toward Emily with a belittling look, ready to throw out his first sentence and weaken her spirit before the hearing even began. He had no idea that the shabby old man sitting silently beside Emily was watching every move like an eagle locking onto its prey. The sun had climbed higher, but the family courthouse lobby felt freezing to Emily. Grant stood directly in front of her, towering over her with an arrogance that seemed to fill the room. His expensive cologne, once familiar, now made her stomach twist. It reminded her that the man standing before her was a stranger, no longer the husband she used to know. Beside Grant stood another sharply dressed man. He hugged a leather document bag to his chest with a smug air, occasionally adjusting his expensive glasses while looking at Emily with open contempt. "Well, look at that," Grant began with biting sarcasm. He deliberately raised his voice so the people nearby would turn. "You actually showed up. I thought you'd spend the whole day crying in a bathroom stall because you were too scared to face me." Emily took a long breath and forced her fragile spine straight. She remembered Samuel's words. "Don't look weak. I came because this is a legal obligation, Grant. I respect the court summons." Emily answered quietly but clearly. Grant snorted, a short, cruel laugh escaping his lips. "Respect the court. Listen to you. Know your place, Emily. Look at yourself. Wrinkled, tired, worn out. How did you get here, a rideshare? Or did you walk so people would feel sorry for you? You smell like sun and street dust." Emily's face burned. Humiliation spread to her ears. Grant knew exactly where to strike. "I took the bus, Grant," Emily answered honestly. "The bus," Grant repeated in disgust, as if she had confessed to eating garbage. He turned to the man beside him. "You hear that, Ryan? The wife of a senior attorney at a top law firm took a city bus. Embarrassing. Thank God that title will be gone soon. I can't imagine my VIP clients finding out my wife was packed in with construction workers and sweat on public transportation." The man named Ryan nodded in agreement, a cynical smile forming on his lips. "Different class, boss. Your decision is right. A woman like this would only stain the image of a firm as prestigious as ours." Heat flashed through Emily's blood. They were talking about her as if she were an object with no ears and no feelings. Being humiliated in public by her own husband and a stranger cut deeply. "Emily, this is Ryan Cole," Grant said, pointing at his colleague with his thumb, without the slightest respect for Emily. "He's my associate, one of the top graduates from law school, and he's going to make sure you leave that courtroom with nothing but those old clothes on your back. So my advice? Instead of being humiliated inside by Ryan's legal arguments, which your small-town brain will never understand, just surrender now." Grant snapped his fingers. Ryan quickly pulled a thick blue folder from his bag and shoved it roughly against Emily's chest, forcing her to take it. "Sign this, now," Grant ordered coldly, staring at her with intimidation. "It's a statement saying you release all claims to marital property. The house, the car, the land, everything is in my name because I paid the mortgage. You were just living off me. Sign it, and I'll give you a goodwill payment of $500. That should be enough for you to go back to some little town and start selling pies at a roadside stand." Emily looked at the blue folder in her trembling hands, shaking now not only from fear but from anger. $500. Grant had valued her devotion, her sweat, and 5 years of loyalty from the bottom at only $500. Meanwhile, the down payment on the house they lived in had come from the savings Emily earned sewing and doing alterations late into the night before Grant became successful. "I won't sign it, Grant," Emily said. Her voice trembled as she held back tears. "We bought that house together. The down payment came from my money. I have rights to that house." Grant's face turned red. A vein stood out in his neck. He had not expected Emily, who was usually quiet and obedient, to dare contradict him in front of his colleague. "You ungrateful," Grant hissed, stepping closer until his face was only inches from hers, trying to intimidate her physically. "You want to play rough? You think your pocket change from back then mattered? I paid the mortgage. You were just a parasite, Emily. A leech who—" Grant's ugly sentence stopped in the air. His furious eyes shifted to the old man, sitting quietly beside the place where Emily stood. A shabby old man with a wooden cane who had been silently listening, but who now looked at Grant with a strange, flat stare. Grant frowned, annoyed by the presence of this stranger, ruining the scenery around him. He waved his hand at Samuel as if shooing away a beggar. "Move, old man. Don't eavesdrop on rich people's business. This is a family matter, not free entertainment," Grant snapped. Samuel did not move at all. He only adjusted the position of his cane calmly and gave a small smile, one full of mystery. "Go on, son. I'm enjoying the show. It isn't every day I get to watch a man dig his own grave with his sharp tongue." Grant's eyes widened in offense. "What did you say? You shameless old fossil. Hey, where's security?" How did a homeless man get into the courthouse waiting area? He's making the place feel crowded. Grant turned to Ryan. Ryan, call security. Tell them to drag this old man out. His smell is breaking my concentration. Grant, Emily cried spontaneously, unable to bear seeing Samuel insulted like that. She stepped in front of Samuel, shielding him from her husband's view. Don't be rude to an elderly man. He helped me on the bus earlier. He's a good person, with far more manners than you. Grant burst into laughter at Emily's defense. Oh, so this is your new friend? A city bus vagrant. Wow, Emily, you really have fallen far. Divorced by a top attorney, and now you're looking for protection from some dusty old beggar. Perfect. You two match. Both pathetic. Ryan chuckled cynically, straightening his tie with arrogance. Forget it, boss. We're not on the level of senile old men like that. It's a waste of time. Just focus on forcing your wife to sign so we can get this over with. Grant stopped laughing and turned his harsh face back to Emily, ignoring Samuel, who remained seated calmly behind her. Listen, Emily, my patience is gone. Sign this now, or I promise that inside that courtroom I'll strip every flaw you have bare. I'll make sure you have no face left to live in this city. Emily stood frozen. Tears fell from her eyes. She felt so small in the shadow of Grant's power. Behind her, Samuel slowly stood. His movement was calm, but he radiated an authority that contrasted sharply with his worn clothing. He gently tapped Emily's shoulder, signaling for her to step aside. Grant Miller, Samuel said. His voice was heavy, deep, and resonant, making Grant instinctively turn. Are you certain you want to continue this display of arrogance? I suggest you speak politely to your wife and to an elder. In the legal world you are so proud of, ethics stand above everything. Grant glared at Samuel, his anger boiling, because he felt lectured by someone beneath him. Who the hell are you to advise me? What do you know about the law? I'm Grant Miller, a skilled attorney from one of the largest firms in Chicago. You're dust under my shoe. Move before I call security and have you dragged out. Samuel only let out a long breath and shook his head slowly, as if watching a misbehaving child who had lost his way. Grant still had no idea that his shouting had become the greatest mistake of his life. He had just awakened a giant, whose portrait he revered on his office wall, yet whose living face he failed to recognize. The courthouse lobby suddenly fell silent, as though the air had been sucked out by the rising tension. Grant, whose pride had been wounded by the old man's warning, huffed harshly. The expensive pen in his hand pointed toward Samuel's face, trembling with anger ready to explode. Listen, an old man, Grant growled, his eyes wild with threat. I don't care who you are. Open your mouth one more time and I'll sue you for harassment. This is between me and my ungrateful wife. Grant turned his anger back to Emily. He grabbed her arm roughly, making her wince. Grant, that hurts, Emily cried, trying to pull free. Sign it now, Grant barked, forcing the blue folder against her chest. Don't expect some knight in shining armor to save you. Know your place, Emily. You're a zero without me. Let go of her. The voice exploded, not from Emily, but from Samuel. This time it was not the weak voice of a frail old man. It thundered with authority, a commanding resonance that could shrink anyone's courage. Grant startled and, by reflex, released Emily's arm. Samuel stepped forward once. The sound of his wooden cane striking the tile floor rang hard and sharp. He stood straight, his chest lifted, as if the burden of age that had bent his back moments earlier had vanished. The old eyes that had seemed tired were now sharp as an eagle's gaze locked on prey. Since when does Whitaker, Sloan and Partners hire street thugs as senior associates? Samuel asked in a measured tone. Grant froze. His eyes widened. The firm's name had been spoken with a specific familiarity no ordinary person would know. Whitaker, Sloan and Partners was where Grant worked, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. How do you know the name of my firm? Grant asked, stammering. His arrogance began to wobble. Samuel did not answer. He slowly straightened the collar of his faded shirt. Then, with calm but meaningful movement, he swept his white hair back with his fingers. His face was now clear beneath the courthouse lights. The firm jaw, the high nose, and the small birthmark beneath his left eye became visible. Ryan, Grant's colleague, suddenly froze behind him. The document bag he had been holding slipped from his hands and fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Ryan, what's wrong with you? Grant asked, confused by his colleague's face, which had turned ghostly pale. Ryan's entire body shook. His eyes were fixed on Samuel's face with horror and awe. "Boss," Ryan whispered in a choked voice, pointing toward Samuel with a trembling finger. "Boss, look carefully." "Look at what?" Grant snapped, annoyed. Then he turned back and studied the old man's face more closely. At that moment, time seemed to stop for Grant. His eyes moved over the old face, and his memory flew to a huge oil portrait hanging in the main lobby of Whitaker, Sloan and Partners. It was the portrait of the founding figure of the firm, a living legend in the legal world, a man whose books had become required reading for law students across the country, the man Grant had long admired, the man whose photograph sat on his desk as motivation. Yet, Grant had never met him in person because the legend had long since retired and withdrawn from public life. The face in front of him, older and thinner than the portrait, was the same face. The blood drained from Grant's face. His skin, which had been red with anger moments earlier, turned as white as paper. His legs felt weak, like jelly. Cold sweat, heavy as beads, formed on his forehead. His heart, which had been pounding from rage, now pounded from terror. Professor Whitaker," Grant whispered, his voice almost gone. Samuel smiled slightly, but it was not the warm smile from the bus. It was the cold smile of a judge ready to pronounce sentence. "So your eyes are not completely blind, Grant Miller," Samuel said calmly, pronouncing Grant's full name with perfect accuracy. "I thought you might have forgotten the face of the man who founded the place where you earn your living." Grant's world collapsed in an instant. His knees shook so badly, he had to grip the back of a chair to keep from falling. The shabby old man he had insulted as a homeless beggar, the man he had called dusty, the man he had tried to have thrown out like a stray dog, was Professor Samuel Whitaker, the sole owner of the law firm where he worked, the man who held complete control over his career and future. Emily stood beside Samuel, confused by the sudden change. She saw her husband, who had roared like a lion moments earlier, shrink into a terrified mouse. "Grant, what's wrong?" Emily asked innocently, not understanding the situation. Grant could not answer. His tongue was stiff, his throat had closed. Ryan recovered first and immediately bowed deeply toward Samuel, nearly at a right angle. His posture was full of fear and excessive respect. "Forgive me, Professor. I didn't recognize you dressed like this. Please forgive my disrespect. I was only here because Grant asked me. I didn't know anything," Ryan blurted, panicking and trying to save himself. Samuel did not look at Ryan. His gaze remained locked on Grant, who stood frozen with his mouth slightly open. "You said your wife was embarrassing because she took the bus," Samuel asked quietly but sharply. "I took the bus today too. Does that mean I am also embarrassing in your eyes, Grant?" "No, Professor. That isn't what I meant," Grant stammered, cold sweat soaking his expensive shirt. "I didn't know it was you. I swear, sir, if I had known." "If you had known it was me, you would have kissed my feet. Is that it?" Samuel cut in cynically. "But because you thought I was poor, you felt entitled to step on me. Is that the mentality of the lawyers I train at my firm?" Samuel's voice rose at the end, making several people in the lobby turn. Grant felt the world spin. The career he had built for years, the reputation he had boasted about, now stood on the edge of ruin because of his own arrogance. He had insulted his own king. Grant looked at Emily with pleading eyes, hoping his wife could calm the legendary man's anger. But Emily stood still, stunned by the authority that now surrounded Samuel. Justice seemed to have finally shown its real face, and that face was looking at Grant with very deep disappointment. Grant collapsed into the waiting chair behind him. His legs had truly lost the strength to hold him. The blue folder containing the one-sided agreement he had tried to force on Emily now lay on the floor, stepped on by his own polished shoe, which no longer looked impressive at all. The sight was stark. The young attorney, who usually stood tall and confident, now looked like a defendant who had just been sentenced to death. In front of him, Samuel did not need to shout to show his power. The professor's silence was far more frightening than 1,000 raised voices. People around the lobby began whispering. Several senior attorneys who happened to pass by and recognized the legendary figure stopped abruptly. Their eyes widened in disbelief. "Isn't that Professor Whitaker?" One middle-aged attorney whispered to another. "He came out of retirement? What kind of case could make the great teacher come to family court himself?" Those whispers reached Grant's ears and crushed his spirit further. He knew exactly who he was facing. Professor Samuel Whitaker, retired Illinois Supreme Court Justice, internationally respected for his integrity. The man whose book, Conscience and Justice, Grant often quoted in his speeches, so he would sound brilliant. The man whose portrait hung in the firm's conference room, where Grant proudly told clients, "Our firm was founded by him, so our quality is beyond question." And now the greatest irony had unfolded. The lawyer who claimed to follow the master's ideals had been caught spitting on the very values the master taught. "Ryan," Samuel said quietly without turning. Ryan, still bent forward, answered immediately. His voice shook. "Yes, Professor. Pick up that folder," Samuel ordered, pointing at the blue folder on the floor with the tip of his cane. Ryan hurried to retrieve it, wiped the dust off with the sleeve of his suit jacket, and stood stiffly waiting for the next order, like a frightened soldier. Samuel extended his hand. Ryan handed over the folder with trembling fingers. Samuel opened it slowly and glanced over the contents. It took only a few seconds for his trained eyes to dissect the injustice in that document. A bitter smile touched his lips. "Remarkable," Samuel murmured, his tone thick with cutting sarcasm. He looked at Grant, who was still staring down. "These clauses are very neatly written, Grant. You used the legal gaps around marital property proof quite cleverly. You manipulated the fact that the house deed is in your name to erase your wife's rights. Technically speaking, this is brilliant." Grant lifted his face a little. For a split second, hope flickered in him that Samuel might be praising his skill. That hope shattered when Samuel continued. "But morally, this is garbage." Samuel tore the folder and its contents in half right in front of Grant's face. The sound of tearing paper rang loudly in the quiet lobby. Grant flinched, his shoulders jerking upward. "Did you study law to protect the weak, Grant? Or to rob your own wife under the cover of legal clauses?" Samuel's voice rose, echoing through the room. "I built that firm with sweat and blood. I spent decades building a reputation that we defend truth. And you used my firm's letterhead to oppress the woman who stood beside you from nothing. Did you think I would stay silent while my name was used for cruelty like this?" "Please, Professor, I made a mistake," Grant squeaked, tears of fear forming in his eyes. His arrogance had vanished completely. "I can explain. This is a personal matter, Professor. Your personal matters reveal your character," Samuel cut in firmly. "An attorney who cannot be fair to his own family will never be fair to his clients. If you can betray and cheat a sincere wife, what will you do to strangers who pay you? Your integrity is zero, Grant." Emily, who had stood silent all this time, stared at Samuel in amazement and emotion. She had never imagined that the old man she helped on the bus out of compassion was a giant who could make her arrogant husband helpless. God had truly sent help from an unexpected direction. Samuel then turned to Emily. His stern face softened instantly. "Forgive me, Emily," Samuel said sincerely. "I feel responsible. I trained the people in my firm, yet I failed to teach this one how to be human. Because of my negligence in allowing someone like him into my organization, you suffered today." "No, sir. I mean, Professor," Emily said, confused about what to call him. "You didn't do anything wrong. You've been so kind to defend me." Samuel smiled, then turned back to Grant, who was still sitting weakly. "Stand up, Grant," Samuel ordered flatly. Grant forced his legs to rise. Though his knees were still shaking badly, he did not dare meet Samuel's eyes. He lowered his head like a defendant awaiting judgment. "The hearing will begin soon," Samuel said, glancing at his old wristwatch. "You want to divorce your wife, don't you? Then go on, proceed with your intention. Walk into that courtroom." Grant stared, bewildered. "But Professor—" "Go in," Samuel interrupted. "But remember one thing. In there, before the panel of judges, I will not sit as a spectator. I will sit as a witness on behalf of your wife." Grant's pale face turned almost gray with fear. "A witness? Professor, you want to be Emily's witness," Grant stammered. Yes, Samuel answered firmly. "I will testify about your wife's noble character, how she helped a frail old man when she herself was in distress. And I will testify about your character too, Grant, about how you treated an elder and your wife in this lobby. The judge inside is a former student of mine. Let's see whether he believes your empty claims or the testimony of his teacher." Grant felt as though lightning had struck him in broad daylight. If Professor Whitaker testified against him, it was over. No judge in that courthouse would dare question the credibility of Samuel Whitaker. Grant would not only lose in divorce court, his career as an attorney would be destroyed. His name would be blacklisted throughout the legal community. "Professor, please don't do that." Suddenly, Grant dropped to his knees on the cold lobby floor, ignoring the last shreds of his ruined pride. He clutched Samuel's and sobbed. "Please, Professor. My career, my future. Please don't destroy me. I'll withdraw the petition. I'll cancel the divorce. I'll go back to her. Please, Professor." The sight was both pitiful and satisfying to anyone who saw it. Grant, who had arrived like a king, was now begging at the feet of the very man he had insulted. Emily turned her face away. She felt pity, but she was also disgusted by her husband's falseness. Grant was not begging because he loved her. He was begging because he feared poverty and the loss of his position. Samuel looked coldly at Grant, who was crouched at his feet. He was not moved in the slightest. Slowly, he shifted his leg and freed it from Grant's grip. "It is too late for acting, Grant," Samuel said coldly. "You're pleading not because you regret hurting your wife, but because you're afraid of losing your world. Your wife deserves her freedom today. She deserves to be free from a parasite like you. Stand up. Don't humiliate yourself any further. We will settle this before the judge like men, the way a man should take responsibility for his actions." Samuel then turned to Emily and held out his wrinkled but steady hand. "Come, Emily. Let's go in. Don't be afraid. Justice is on your side." Emily took his hand with tears in her eyes. She walked into the courtroom with her head held high, accompanied by the legal legend at her side. Behind them, Grant dragged his feet with empty eyes and a broken spirit, following them toward the courtroom that would become the burial ground of his own arrogance. Courtroom number 3 felt colder and more tense than usual. The dull white walls and rows of wooden benches stood as silent witnesses to the tension crawling through the air. At the petitioner's table, Grant sat slumped in his chair. There was no proud straight back anymore. His face was pale, his eyes fixed blankly on the still empty bench where the judge would sit. Cold sweat continued to run down his temples, even though the air conditioning hummed strongly. Beside him, Ryan, the smooth-talking associate who usually carried himself with confidence, now sat stiff as a wax figure about to melt. He did not even dare open his briefcase. Ryan understood that both their careers were at stake in that room. Fighting Emily might have been easy. Fighting the giant shadow behind Emily was professional suicide. Across from them at the respondent's table, Emily sat quietly, her hands were folded in her lap. Samuel sat beside her. Though he wore only faded clothes and old dress pants, the authority radiating from him made the simple wooden chair feel like a throne. He sat upright, both hands resting on his wooden cane, his eyes closed for a moment, as though meditating before battle. "All rise." The clerk's voice broke the silence. The side door opened. 3 judges in black robes entered the room. Everyone stood. The presiding judge, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a stern face, walked toward the center seat. But as his eyes swept across the room before sitting down, his movements stopped suddenly. His gaze locked onto the old man at the respondent's table. He narrowed his eyes, making sure he was not mistaken. The next second, his stern expression changed into one of shock and extraordinary respect. He knew that man. Who wouldn't? This was the professor who had supervised his thesis years ago, as well as a retired justice whose integrity had become a legend in the courts. "Professor Whitaker," the presiding judge murmured without meaning to. His voice was clearly heard in the Hequit room. The 2 associate judges turned in surprise. Then, almost by reflex, they gave a slight bow toward the respondent's table, a gesture of respect rarely seen in a courtroom. Samuel opened his eyes, gave a small smile, and nodded with quiet authority. "Please continue your noble duty, Your Honor. Pretend I am not here. I am only an old man accompanying a friend in search of justice." The sentence, "pretend I am not here," had exactly the opposite effect. Samuel's presence changed the entire atmosphere of the room. The presiding judge swallowed, realizing this hearing was being watched directly by his great teacher. The standard of justice in that room had suddenly risen to the highest level. There would be no room for dirty games. "Yes, Professor, thank you for your presence." "It is an honor," the presiding judge replied, his voice slightly nervous but respectful. Then he looked sharply toward Grant, with a gaze that seemed to say, "Are you trying to get yourself killed by going against someone protected by him?" The judge struck the gavel 3 times. The hearing began. "Mr. Grant Miller," the presiding judge said in a heavy, authoritative voice. "In the petition you filed, you seek divorce on the grounds of incompatibility, and you seek full control of all marital assets on the claim that your wife, Mrs. Emily Wilson Miller, made no economic contribution. Do you still stand by that claim?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Grant. Grant tried to open his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. His tongue felt numb. He glanced toward Samuel. The old man was not looking at him. He stared straight ahead calmly. But Grant knew that one wrong word from his mouth, one more lie spoken in front of his teacher's teacher, would end him. Samuel could destroy his reputation with one phone call to the State Bar's disciplinary board. Ryan nudged Grant's elbow lightly under the table, sending a panicked signal. "Drop it, boss. Drop the claim. Don't be insane," his body language seemed to whisper. Grant trembled. He remembered Samuel's warning in the lobby. Your integrity is 0. If he insisted on stripping Emily of everything before Samuel's eyes, he would not only lose respect, he would lose his future. The law firm where he worked belonged to Samuel Whitaker. "Mr. Miller," the presiding judge said more firmly when Grant did not answer. "I repeat, do you still stand by your claim to full control of the marital property?" Grant drew a long breath, one that felt heavy and painful. He looked at Emily briefly. She was looking at him with hatred. She looked at him with pity. That look struck his pride harder than anger ever could. He realized he had already lost completely before the gavel ever fell. "No, Your Honor," Grant finally answered, his voice hoarse and weak, like a deflated balloon. The judge raised an eyebrow. "No? Explain what you mean." Grant lowered his head deeply, unable to lift his face. I withdraw the claim to full marital assets, Your Honor. I acknowledge that the house and its contents are shared property. In fact, I am willing to surrender my entire share to my wife as a form of responsibility." Beside him, Ryan exhaled in relief and nearly slid out of his chair. At least they had not committed professional suicide together that day. Emily stared in shock. She turned to Samuel. The old man remained calm. There was no sign of victory on his face, only a small nod, as though this was normal, as though this was exactly what should have happened. "Let the record reflect," the judge said firmly. "Mr. Miller surrenders his share of the marital assets fully to Mrs. Wilson Miller. Now, as for the grounds for divorce, do you still insist that Mrs. Wilson Miller is unworthy to accompany you as your wife?" The question was a trap. If Grant answered yes, citing economics or social status as he had in his original filing, he would look deeply contemptible in Samuel's eyes. Grant shook his head weakly. Tears of frustration and shame fell onto the table. "No, Your Honor, that reason is not relevant. I was wrong. I failed to be a good husband. I want this divorce because I am the one who is no longer worthy of her." A thin wave of emotion moved through the tense room. Grant's confession, though born of fear, sounded honest to Emily's ears. This was the first time Grant had admitted fault. Even if circumstance had forced him to do it, Samuel suddenly lifted his right hand slightly. "Your Honor, may I say a few words as the respondent's companion?" The presiding judge nodded respectfully at once. "Please, Professor, the floor is yours." Samuel did not stand. He remained seated, but his voice filled the room. He did not look at the judge. He looked straight at the side of Grant's lowered face. "The law exists to humanize human beings, Grant," Samuel said softly, yet the words cut to the bone. "Your law degree and expensive suit are worthless if you use them to oppress the person who once entrusted her life to you. Today you lose your wife, but at least you saved what remains of your conscience by speaking honestly just now. Do not repeat this mistake in the future. Become an attorney who defends truth, not greed." Grant sobbed quietly, his shoulders shaking. Those words were both a slap and a final piece of advice from the idol he had disappointed. The shame he felt that day would mark him for life, becoming a nightmare he would never forget. "Thank you, Professor," the presiding judge said softly, before restoring his official authority. "Very well. Since the petitioner has acknowledged fault, surrendered his claim to the assets, and both parties agree to separate, this court will proceed to issue its judgment." Emily listened to every word that came from the judge's mouth with mixed feelings, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of freedom. She would not be left with nothing. She would not be humiliated. Instead, she watched her arrogant husband collapse under the weight of remorse. When the gavel struck 3 times and the divorce was declared final, Emily felt as if thousands of pounds had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned to the side and looked at Samuel's gentle old face. "Thank you, sir," Emily whispered, her eyes wet. "You didn't just help me on the bus, you saved my life." Samuel smiled faintly. He patted Emily's hand like a father calming his daughter. "No, child. You saved yourself the moment you chose not to lose your kindness, even while you were being hurt." After the hearing ended, Grant could not bring himself to approach Emily. He only stood a few feet away, looking at the woman he had once underestimated. There was regret in his eyes, but regret that arrived too late could not heal the wounds he had made. "Emily," Grant said in a weak voice. Emily turned to him, calm now. For the first time in a long while, she did not tremble before him. "I'm sorry," Grant whispered. "I really am." Emily looked at him for a moment. The man who once towered over her now seemed small, very small. "I hope you learn from this, Grant," she said quietly. "But I'm done being the place where you throw your pride." Grant's lips parted, but no words came out. He lowered his head. Ryan stood behind him, silent and pale, no longer laughing, no longer smug. The 2 men who had entered the courthouse like conquerors now looked like people leaving a battlefield after defeat. Samuel rose slowly from his chair. Emily immediately reached out to help him, just as she had on the bus. This time, however, she knew exactly whose arm she was holding. Not a helpless old man, but a man whose dignity had been hidden beneath simple clothes. As they walked out of the courtroom, several people in the hallway turned to look at them. Some whispered Samuel's name with awe. Others looked at Emily with curiosity and respect. But Emily no longer cared about judgmental eyes. The eyes that had hurt her that morning no longer had power over her. In the lobby, Samuel paused and looked toward the bright courthouse courtyard. "Your victory today did not happen because I am powerful," he said. "It happened because your heart was sincere. God is the greatest director of all. He arranged the scene so you would ride the same bus as me, so you would help me, and so I could be there to return that kindness. That was God's way of embracing you while you were in distress." When they reached the front entrance, a luxurious black sedan, far more impressive than Grant's, was already waiting. A driver in a neat uniform hurried out and opened the rear door. Samuel's driver had arrived to pick him up. Samuel stopped for a moment before getting into the car. He reached into the pocket of his faded shirt and pulled out a simple ivory business card with raised gold lettering. Only his name and private phone number were printed on it, without a long string of titles. "Keep this," Samuel said, placing the card in Emily's hand. "Your house is safe now, but life must go on. If you need work or legal help in the future, do not hesitate to call this number. My office door is always open to honest people like you." Emily accepted the card with trembling hands. She bowed respectfully and kissed the back of Samuel's hand, as a daughter might do for her father. "Thank you, sir. May God keep you healthy and give you a long life. One message from me," Samuel said, gently patting Emily's shoulder. His gaze was deep and serious. "Never regret this separation. Don't cry because you lost that man. You lost nothing, Emily. He is the one who suffered the great loss because he threw away a jewel to chase gravel. You have just won back your dignity. Go home with your head held high, decorate your house again, cook your favorite meal, begin a new and happy life." Emily nodded firmly. Tears of gratitude fell down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. "Yes, sir. I'll remember your words." Samuel smiled widely and got into his elegant car. The window lowered slowly, revealing the legal legend's raised hand as he waved before the car moved away from the courthouse, easing into the busy streets of Chicago. After Samuel left, Emily stood alone on the sidewalk. Strangely, she did not feel lonely, she felt full. She looked toward the road where the same kind of city bus she had ridden that morning passed by again, trailing dark smoke behind it. That battered bus, which she had once seen as a symbol of her poverty, had turned out to be the golden carriage that carried her toward justice. Emily lifted her face to the clear blue sky. The sun shone brightly, dazzling but warm. She touched the pocket of her dress, feeling the texture of Samuel's business card and the house key that was now legally hers. There was no more fear, no more shame, no more sense of being small. Grant might have had status and money, but Emily had something no amount of wealth could buy: courage and a clean conscience. Emily smiled wide, the most sincere smile she had worn in the past year. She walked lightly toward the bus stop, ready to go home to her house, her palace, and begin a new chapter. Life is full of surprises, and that day Emily learned that even the smallest kindness is never wasted. Justice had found its way home before evening fell. The moral is this: kindness and good manners are the best investment you can ever make, and they never leave you poorer. Never underestimate someone because of how they look. Never be afraid to do good, even when you yourself are struggling. In the end, integrity and a sincere heart will always stand taller than arrogance and the highest position. God never sleeps when weighing the deeds of his children. And now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Would you have stayed silent, fought back, or walked away sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you've ever seen kindness come back at the perfect time. If this story touched your heart, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next story.